This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Some archaeologists call it the world's oldest temple. There are others who say it had other purposes, but one thing's sure, it was devoted to reaching the gods. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. It is our monthly Iron and Myth session, and this month we have a special guest joining us. We are discussing for the next few months some of the new books that have been put forward by your humble hosts here on Iron and Myth. And joining us for our first monthly session to discuss the new book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, which debuted at Amazon as the #1 new release in archaeology. We welcome as our special guest Dr. Aaron Judkins and his co-author, of course, part of the regular Iron and Myth crew here, Dr. Judd Burton, alongside Pastor Doug Van Dorn and best-selling author, screenwriter, award-winning screenwriter, Brian Godawa. Gentlemen, Göbekli Tepe, one of the most fascinating sites on Earth. I know that we all had the homework assignment of reading Decoding Göbekli Tepe. I admit I had a head start because I wrote the foreword, so I had to read it so I could write the foreword. But fascinating stuff and some new information coming out as, even since the publication of the book. Aaron, I'm going to throw this to you right up front. If you had to characterize, say, in an elevator pitch description of Göbekli Tepe, how would you describe that site in southern Turkey?
Well, it's classified as the world's oldest temple, going back some 10,000 years ago, according to the standard chronology timeline. So the characterization would be it's pre-pottery Neolithic age. Going back to the Stone Age. This is before the invention of writing, before the invention of the wheel, before the invention of pottery. This is why they call it pre-pottery Neolithic. And so here we have something that's very bizarre when they discovered Göbekli Tepe, and that's this megalithic architecture back in the Stone Age, and that's not supposed to be there.
Judd, so we're talking pre-pottery Neolithic. That means these people somehow managed to build this massive site and other ones like it in southern Turkey, like Karahan Tepe, and without the use of the wheel. Mm-hmm. I mean, how are they supposed to have moved all of these stones? How big are some of these stones?
Well, they're immense. There are a number of theories about how they moved them. A lot of this stuff is actually cut out of the native stone there, which is largely limestone. But it took a lot of human labor to move these from quarry to site. But yeah, the interesting thing here is this is allegedly a time that is before the invention of the wheel. Which begs the question: what are the cultural mechanisms or cultural variables that are not readily in place to make this make sense? And that's one of the things that Aaron and I tried to tackle in the book: is where are these abilities, whether it's architecture or the calculus and engineering actually necessary to build this stuff? What is the agency of the influence on these people? Because humanity at the time, and any archaeologist worth their salt is going to tell you this, but human populations at the time were all largely hunter-gatherers. There were some horticulturalists, but they're largely nomadic and semi-nomadic hunter-gathering populations. So there had to be an outside influence, and that's one of the things that we're tackling in the book.
So outside influence, Judd, you're talking about you're not talking about an advanced civilization from the stars. You're talking about something coming from another dimension, perhaps. We're talking supernatural.
Yeah. So I mean to my mind, and I know that Aaron can speak to this as well. The kind of 90-degree angle change in cultural trajectory that takes place with not only sites like Göbekli Tepe, but sister sites too, like Karahan Tepe and Novoli Chari. The magnitude of that change doesn't really have an exact analog in human culture, but we do have examples of cultures being irrevocably changed. For instance, during the colonial period, the age of exploration, the clash between the Spanish and the Inca in South America, which sort of makes the climax for Jared Diamond's book Guns, Germs, and Steel. And there were all of these distal causes that set up the Spanish in the Old World to be in a place to not just change but overpower and subjugate the culture in the New World. Whether that's geography, the alignment of the continents, or epidemiology, or agriculture, metalsmithing, those things traveled more easily in the Old World and set them up millennia before Pizarro and Atahualpa even meet in South America. The reason that I bring that into the conversation is that change that was brought out had irrevocable implications for native populations. Take out the decimation of populations by things like smallpox that their immune systems weren't even ready for, but the boots on the ground cultural change that took place by this outside force, in this case the Europeans, and the impact that it had on the New World, on the native populations. If you take that model and apply it to the kind of change that's taking place in prehistoric Anatolia and really throughout the prehistoric Near East, there's no outside agency indigenous to this planet that could bring about that sort of cultural change. And so the missing variable here can't be a naturalistic one. It has to be a supernatural, extra dimensional explanation. And Aaron and I we're not waxing ancient aliens in this book, but we are acknowledging that there is an outside extra dimensional influence, just by the nature, again, the magnitude of the change that takes place. You're not going to get another human population because we don't have evidence for it, archaeological evidence for it at the time to make this kind of change. And so by default, you have to look to the supernatural for an explanation.
In other words, no culture to the north, say north of the Black Sea, that was building these kind of structures that suddenly traveled south through the Caucasus, right, showed up in what is now Turkey and said, hey guys, here's how you do it.
Right. Yeah, we don't have that. There are varying degrees of advancement in the use of lithic technology, but there's much more going on than that at Göbekli Tepe. It's not just a matter of an upgrade in Stone Age technology. This is orders of magnitude more sophisticated. We're not talking about a way to drill through a bead without it shattering. Its cosmic implications are much broader.
Brian, I want to bring you in here because this is the kind of thing that you explore in your series of novels and in your fiction, the Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, Chronicles of the Nephilim. How do you interpret what you see historically in Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I liked about the book, what I found interesting was, you guys draw from David Rohl, who's an Egyptologist who has, been really crucial in creating the new chronology that is, it is at odds with the standard consensus of historical timelines. And he does bring some interesting materials into the mix. And I drew from him heavily for all my books. Not, he's not the only one, and there are other good counter arguments, like from Doug Petrovich. He makes some really good arguments as well. But I found that to be intriguing, and I was actually curious. How did you guys, he could role places Eden in that, South Anatolian Caucasus Mountain region. How did you guys you draw from Roll to make that conclusion? Like what was it about, his work that drew you to it?
Aaron, you want to take that one?
I'm going to pass that one to Judd. I think that's a good one for Judd.
Yeah, well, David Roll he's a brilliant guy, and if people haven't seen the what's the series called? It's Patterns of Evidence, I think. Excellent series that sort of summarizes some of David's ideas. But David realizes, like we do, that Moses was somebody who was educated in the Egyptian court, and what that, he had access to the best of everything, which meant he had access to, information, ethnological and historical information on the cultures and societies of the ancient Near East, and that would include the geography of the ancient Near East. And so, when Moses is describing all of this stuff in Genesis in terms of the location of Eden, what's he going to use? He's going to use the same kind of markers that, let's say, John is going to use in his vision of the end. He's going to use cultural markers and geography that he's familiar with, and so it's just so happens that it's pretty specific in terms of the location. And so Aaron and I, like David, acknowledge that educational aspect of Moses's background in terms of the location of Eden, and I stand by that today. That's we should trust Moses, because he not only got the vision from God, but he also had access to basically the best educational system of his day while he was in court, to be able to make these geographical descriptions as precise as they were.
I have one other question. And I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead, before we go into the details. But one of the other elements that I found interesting in your thesis, that I didn't have, because I didn't know much about Göbekli Tepe when I wrote my early novels on Noah and Enoch and stuff. But I found it interesting, and I hadn't considered, and what that is, how do you connect? How would you describe your connection of, like, I draw from the Watchers and Hermann, but how do you connect the Watchers and the Watcher paradigm to Göbekli Tepe? Because that I found to be very, very interesting. I don't know if I agree with it, but it was definitely made me start thinking, and willing to go down that path and learn more.
Well, I'll take this one. Judd actually writes a chapter in the book regarding this specifically in chapter 10. But here's the connection that I made going back to the Watchers. In Enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe, there is two anthropomorphic stone pillars that are 18.5 feet tall. And when I realized that they were anthropomorphic, which means that they're human-like, no faces, but human-like, that really captivated me, because initially I had dismissed Göbekli Tepe. I didn't really look into it, but I'd seen some images, and I quickly dismissed it. And it wasn't until I really began digging into it that I realized that these central pillars were anthropomorphic. And at the top, about where the neck is, this is an area that on both pillars, they have in the basically this area, there's more than one image. On Eastern Pillar 18, there's a crescent moon with a full disk above that, and then above that there's a what looks like an English letter H. It's not an English letter H, but that's what it looks like. On Western Pillar 31 is the image of a bull cranium. Now, the image of the bull cranium is the thing that got me, and I'll try to put this very short. But the people of the Neolithic were known as people of the bull. They had deified the image of the bull. So we see the ancient auroch bull that they hunted there. It was like to the Native Americans where they hunted the bison. This is one of probably the largest creatures in the Fertile Crescent. Now, they hunted antelope and a bunch of other things, gazelles and wild pigs. But the big giant Auric bull was one of them. And I think they deified that bull. And in doing so, here's how I make the connection to the Watchers. When you go back and look at the image of the cherub, you understand that the image of the cherub has 4 faces. And one of those faces is the image of the bull or an ox. Okay, same thing. If you look at it biblically through the lens of the Bible, you see that the children of Israel, when they were coming out of Egypt, they made a golden calf. If you look at the Baal worship, you see that Baal worship was in the image of a bull. If you look at Egyptian history, you'll see the image of Hathor was the image of a cow goddess. Even in today's modern day cultures, India still worships the cow, and they deify it. So the image of the face of the bull ties directly to the Watchers, and there's details that we walk you through in the book to show you how we get there, and then Judd brings it all together. But this is the image of the cherub, and when you realize that biblical connection to the Watchers, then it suddenly starts to make sense.
Yeah, in fact, when you compare the description of the living creatures around the throne of God in Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10, in Ezekiel 1 it's human, ox, eagle, lion, and in Ezekiel 10 it's human, cherub, eagle,
That's right.
lion. So cherub equals ox. Doug, as a pastor, this is the kind of thing that some people, in fact, when I had Judd and Aaron on my program a couple of months ago, we had a friend reach out and say, this seems fringe. Why should Christians even care about this? As a pastor who gets into some fringy type stuff with your Giant Steps podcast, what would your answer be?
Well, I mean, I'm a bit biased, Derek, because it's pretty much all I do. So, I mean, I don't get into the fringe just because it's fringy and weird. I get into it because it teaches us things. I don't know, in a roundabout way, about things that are really, really important, and especially the supernatural. What Aaron was just talking about. If you're able to connect a bull to a cherubim, and then all of a sudden you start seeing these connections with the Watcher story, like this is stuff that has such powerful ability to explain things that without it you don't have that ability to do. And as a pastor, how many times do I get asked questions about things in the Bible that most people say I haven't got any idea what that means? Our friend Mike Heiser used to talk about how if it's weird, it's probably important. Then he tells this story, right, where he goes to this church, and they're in 1 Peter chapter 3, and he looks over at Draina and he goes, oh, this ought to be interesting to see what he does with it. And then the guy just completely skips the text, right? Mm-hmm. And she looks over at him and goes, we're not coming back, are we? He goes, we're not coming back. That's the kind of a thing, because there's so many strange things. And even though Göbekli Tepe is not itself in the Bible, these guys do a great job of connecting it to biblical sacred geography, the direction of evil, all kinds of different things that would help you understand at the very least a pre-Diluvian world, probably post-Diluvian, after the flood as well. So,
Jed, you mentioned the 90-degree change in the direction of that Neolithic culture. Mm-hmm. How is that evidence? I mean, what evidence is there that this change was based around the worship of these entities that influenced that Neolithic culture?
Well, because one of the biggest pieces of evidence is what archaeologists uncovered largely during the tenure of Klaus Schmidt's work as the primary investigator there. But and consequently, this is why I used to tell my students that this site is the paradigm that shatters the paradigm. Because for the longest time, scholars have posited that city-state dwelling civilizations were only epiphenomenal of agriculture, that the kind of societal sedentarism could only happen as a result of agriculture. But we know that at Göbekli Tepe, the impetus for the site itself was a religious one, that they went here specifically to build this temple complex to their gods, and the stratification of society, the development of agriculture, all of those sorts of things that have historically been hallmarks of civilizations, they come in the wake of the establishment of Göbekli Tepe. So the first and perhaps even the most crucial piece of evidence is the entire rationale behind the site itself.
There were some unique things that were found there, and I know that we've learned some things since the book was published. For example, it was believed previously that there were no dwellings there, which was really strange and unique. That has since proven to be untrue. I sent you guys an article this week, which you already knew about, of course. Aaron, does the fact that people actually lived at this site, which was previously unknown, does that change the interpretation of Göbekli Tepe?
I think it does. Yeah, sure. The reason is, initially they thought they came because they know that they had they practiced this mega feast, if you will. They had ritualistic feasting. That's what I'm trying to think of. And they know they did that, but
Drinking
they thought
too.
they just did that and then stayed for a while and left. Now we know that they lived and made a home at Göbekli Tepe. And what we know now, information's so slow coming out of Göbekli Tepe, but what we know now is that there's rectangular structures adjacent to the circular enclosures. And those rectangular structures, apparently some of those are homes that they've excavated, and they have found 3 human burials under the floors of those homes at Göbekli Tepe. 2, I think, were buried close together, and then 1 was buried a little bit further out. But that's all in the literature now, and we actually talk about the burials very briefly in the book. But right after the book came out, then they said, look, now we know that there's rectangular structures they live, so it does change the interpretation, because we know that they lived there as a habitation. So this site was probably continually inhabited. Scholars think that it was between 1,000 and 1,500 years of continual, or at least in use. So the habitation definitely is a directional change in this interpretation, because now we're seeing that they made a home there, and we see thousands of grinding stones, mortars, pestles, things to grind the wild wheat and the grains and the barley that are in the Haran plain, very close to them. And they've also discovered sickle blades made out of obsidian. So we know that they were going down there, harvesting those grains, and then bringing them back. And then they would make that into bread. We also see stone vats where they took the barley and they were fermenting that into beer. So we know now that they did live at the site, and that really changes the understanding so far what we know about at least the use of Göbekli Tepe.
It's a city. Just
Yeah, and they've only excavated about 10% of it, right? So there's a lot, there's more that we don't know than what we know. So I can only imagine how many changes of perspectives we're going to have.
It's about between 5 and 10% excavated. 10% would be a pretty liberal estimate. As a matter of fact, they said in the last 5 to 7 years, that percentage has not really changed at all, which is it seems odd to us. But look, it took 10 years to excavate enclosure D alone, and now they know through GPR, which is ground penetrating radar, that there is about 20 of these enclosures that are still under the ground. They've not been
Oh,
excavated.
my. Wow. So
Aaron, I got
we're
a
talking
question
about
too.
150 years before they get this all done is what I've read. This is
Yeah.
incredible.
So I've heard that there's a lot of, controversy around one of the stones there called the Vulture Stone. What can you tell us about that one? Anything unique or interesting? One of those big stones that has the carvings on it?
Yeah, the Vulture Stone is Pillar 43 in enclosure, I think it's in enclosure D.
Yeah.
This has been interpreted as a big comet coming down and hitting the Earth. I look at it a little bit differently. I'm not saying those are wrong. I think every theory should be on the table about this for now until we know for sure. But using the approach of Occam's razor, and with the understanding that we're bringing to the book with the new theories, that this is a regeneration site, and there's probably language associated on the stones at the site, I think that the Vulture Stone gives us something different. And that is that the vulture is part of this regeneration cycle that the people that lived in the Neolithic observed. They believed, just like we do, that there's a life after death, and they practiced this. And this is what we're seeing at Göbekli Tepe on the stones. But specifically on the Vulture Stone, we see a number of vultures. We see 3 what people call handbags. I think they're baskets up at the top, and those baskets are full of wheat. You'll see kind of wheat coming out from the bottom and the top. And then you'll see next to that vulture, you'll see what people call is a head. Now, we see a lot of headless imagery, not only at Göbekli Tepe, but at neighboring sites like Karahan Tepe and other places. This headless phallic imagery. But we also see that on the stone, on Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone, right down at the very bottom, towards the right bottom, is a headless figure. And so they say, well, that's the head up there. I don't think it's a head at all. I think it's an egg. I think it's a cosmic egg. This gets back into the regeneration cycle that the vulture plays in the afterlife, specifically linked to Eve. So when the vulture, when someone dies, their spirit goes through this regeneration process that we talk about in the book. But look, one of the symbolisms represented in the iconography of the vulture is the vulture carrying that person's soul back up to the heavens to be reborn into eternity. And this is exactly what we're seeing through the cosmic egg, is that this vulture's taken this human soul, being reborn after death into the afterlife back to the heavens. And I think that's what this symbolism is specifically talking about on Pillar 43.
And it's a symbolism that survived well beyond the Neolithic period. Those are ideas that continued to exist in religions throughout the region, notably Avestan religions on the Iranian plateau. So, there's some interesting stuff going on the Vulture Stone for sure.
Yeah, Judd's right there. You also see it play out in Egyptian history, and here it is briefly. They say the ruling pharaoh back when Egypt was all all combined, that the ruling pharaoh wore the headdress of a serpent and a vulture. Okay, and Egyptologists say that this represents the rulership of Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. So he ruled over the whole land. But here's a deeper meaning behind the vulture. The pharaoh was the embodiment of a god deity incarnate into a human. This hasn't really happened before. We see deifications of kings and of ancestors, but now when you're getting up to Egypt, they have deified the pharaoh as a god. And when he wore that double crown of the serpent and the vulture, what that really meant symbolically was that he had the power over life and death, and the vulture represented life.
How do we fit this into the biblical paradigm then? Is this pre-flood, post-flood? Are we dealing with the spiritual or supernatural influence at Göbekli Tepe being the watchers that were then condemned to the netherworld? Or are we talking about afterwards where we're dealing with the second wave of sons of God, which would have been a post-Babel event?
And to add to that, to the question, does that play into why they deliberately buried it?
Judd, you want to take the first part of that?
Yeah, I'll take part of that one. Let's see how I can word this. I think there are implications that are both pre-flood and post-flood, because of the if I can sort of pull this back out in a kind of meta perspective, the supernatural entities that were involved in this complex of sites, not just Göbekli Tepe, but undoubtedly sister sites like Karahan Tepe and Novali Chari. They knew enough about this region, not from Yahweh's perspective, but they knew enough about this region that it was going to be significant. And so they didn't waste much time in setting up an outpost, which is really what one of the things that Aaron and I are arguing in the book, in the region. They knew enough that Anatolia, both before the flood and after the flood, would be crucial, really, to the story of Israel. In fact, the nation of Israel literally springs out of Anatolia. Abraham is called out of Haran, but in terms of pre-flood importance of the site, Göbekli Tepe is it's near the headwaters of the Euphrates, which puts it close to the region of Eden. And the watchers would have known that. And one of the things that we posit in the book is that almost in a battle-style stratagem, the watchers hoped to somehow weaponize this region that was different. It was this place where heaven and earth touched. It was a place where God walked around with Adam and Eve. And so our suspicion is that they either wanted to overthrow the angel that guarded the gate of Eden, or to persuade that angel to their cause in this sort of pre-Babel stratagem. And so to sort of set the stage, the watchers knew enough that this region was going to be important for the nation of Israel, the Messiah. If they could get their grubby little hands on it somehow and weaponize it, then they were going to do that. And I think that there are good cases to be made for that, in terms of its pre-flood significance. And then I'll pass the torch to Aaron, and he can give his response to that.
Yeah, I'll just
and the burial.
And the burial. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sure. I think Judd's right on the influence of the Watchers pre-flood in the antediluvian world, and then in the post-flood region. This is where I really come in with on the post-flood side. But look, we see that when Abraham's called out of this area, they're already worshiping the moon god in this area. We see in the archaeological record, there's a crescent standard with the crescent moon, flanked by two males in worship and reverence to that moon deity. We see at the same time in ancient Jericho, which is very close to the time frame of Göbekli Tepe on the conventional timeline, that they also worship the moon god. So there is a spiritual influence that's happening before the nation of Israel is ever called out, or before Abraham or Abram is ever called out of that land in that area, in that region. And we see why I think he does that. God relegates those nations over to the enemy territory, and he calls out one guy for one nation for himself. And then we see the 70 and their principalities having influence over these regions and over these nations, what would become nations and powers. These are principalities that's over them. And this gets back exactly to the Watchers, because the Watchers were supposed to record activity, not to interfere in the events of mankind. And that's where they crossed the line when Jude said that they left their first estate and they transformed into a physicality. God said, you're going to die like men. And when they did, that their spirits then became disembodied spirits. And then the children of the Nephilim also died a physical death, as they were, 1/3 God, 2/3 human. Getting back to the burial of Göbekli Tepe, they said initially that the reports were it's definitely buried. Now they're kind of changing that and saying, well, perhaps it's the overburden from above that over time that's all slid down with earthquakes and whatever. That's all slid down and it's kind of naturally buried it over. I think perhaps both is right. And here's why I say that. Is because at Karahan Tepe, that site was buried. It was deliberately buried. Why? Is because some of the stone faces it's a neighboring site to Göbekli Tepe. Some of the stone faces that they found, and they were pretty large, some of those faces were defaced. Their nose was cut off, and they were placed upside down in at the site and then deliberately buried. Now we see some very similar things at Göbekli Tepe. We see some of the same principles where they take some of these artifacts like the stone heads, they turn them upside down and they're buried. They're purposely placed in the enclosures and buried. So I think probably both is right. I think they probably purposely buried it, but then over time, because it's a very large site, you're just going to bury some of the things that you want buried and covered up. Over time, eventually that all filled in to what we know as a tepe now. In Turkish, a tepe means a hill. Specifically, Göbekli Tepe means a pregnant hill or navel hill.
Navel.
So I think that's probably why they did that.
Doug, this just reminds me of what we heard from Dr. Mike Freakman at Gilgal Rephaim when we were there. He took us up on the back of the Serpent Mound and was showing us the rectangular dwellings of, I don't know, like a priestly class who oversaw what was going on at Göbekli Tepe. But in his paper on that dwelling on the back of the Serpent Mound of Bashan, he wrote that those had been ritually buried sometime around the end of the Chalcolithic, which is 3,500 BC, give or take, which is about 5,000 years after Göbekli Tepe was abandoned? And in fact, in his paper, he mentioned that this was one of a number of sites in the ancient Near East where ritual site, even Joshua's altar was buried when the Israelites abandoned it for Shiloh.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we may be looking at is some spiritual buyers' regret. That the whatever had been the occupants at these places saw the results of the deal that they had made, essentially, and that's true for post-flood influences as well. It may be that one of the ways in which Watcher tech or Watcher knowledge was recovered, in addition to a second incursion, is that some of the writings that they left, which arguably may be at sites like Göbekli Tepe. I think Aaron has made a good case for that. I'm certainly not on board for it. But we might have some insight from apocryphal sources like Jubilees that recount stories such as Canaan in the line of Arphaxad, who recovered at least some of this knowledge was preserved in the family because he knew how to read what he found, this Watcher knowledge on the rocks, and was able to use it to further his own interest. But the information that was passed down, and the awful results of it. That's why I say what we may be looking at here are several cases of spiritual buyer's regret.
So, I haven't asked you guys any questions. I have like a million questions, but the one that's most pressing and that I would like to have you guys address is enclosure D and its shape and the stones. So when you look at this thing, it has this hold stone, right? That's pointing right at north. And then it's got these 11 other stones that are, I mean, it looks like it could be a wristwatch on your arm. It looks like a clock. It looks like a dial, right? 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. The stones are all pointing, and even with that pillar 43 that Aaron brought up earlier, that vulture stone, it seems to be pointing right at that hold stone. And Judd, you and I have talked a little bit about this, but I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about, first of all, and it's only been you and I talking, so it's not public, but like why, what's going on at that? Is it a calendar? Is it a timepiece for a day? Is it looking at the great year? What do you make of the fact that it looks like a clock? And then why this hold stone that points north? And especially into your discussion, Judd, where you talk about the direction of evil. And you even connect that a little bit to Mount Hermon. So what are some of you guys' thoughts on that whole thing, that whole complex D?
Well, we're certainly learning more about the archaeoastronomy of the complex of sites. I have little doubt that it is a clock of sorts, that it is a calendar of sorts, that it is recounting things, and the Great Year may be one of those. I know that there have been several archaeoastronomers who have applied their talents to deciphering potential alignments and even some of the constellations that are brought. Like Aaron brought up the vulture stone, or we've talked about the vulture stone. One of the theories is that vulture, in addition to being representing a comet impact, is that it's a representation of Sagittarius, the archer, and that whereas the people of Göbekli Tepe interpreted the shape with a vulture, the bow shape would correspond to the wings in the stars of the Sagittarius's bow. So clearly, wherever the tutelage of the Watchers and the acumen of the people that built Göbekli Tepe meets, they were clearly sophisticated star watchers. I mean, the construction of the site also belies that. The acquisition of the kind of calculus that you would have to derive from the movements, watching the movements of celestial bodies, would give you that sort of skill. Again, not taking out the influence of the Watchers here. So I think that we're going to be finding more and more that this site is a clock of sorts.
Was it for just marking the days, or there was I'm sorry, I know there was a theory that was put out there that this pointed back to some catastrophic, celestial event, the collision of a. Wasn't that what
comet.
that was? Comet. That was
comet and meteor impact sort of a thing. Yeah.
Right. Wasn't that Graham Hancock's theory that he was trying to find with the destruction layer around the planet?
I think Graham and
or
Michael
is it just
Collins.
marking the movement of the? Okay.
And
I know that this kind of goes into a little bit more about the cosmic egg thing that you were talking about, Aaron. Andrew Collins talks about how he thought that the vulture represented Cygnus, and Cygnus is this constellation that's right there at the North Pole, at the North Star.
Yeah.
And that he thought that the egg was really the North Star, like it was a star map, and that these ancient peoples believed just almost exactly what you said, that was the place where the soul traveled into the cosmos to get to the other side or whatever, that people would take them there. So when you were talking about that, I thought, wow, it's very similar to what Collins said.
I didn't, get into that because others have already put that theory forward, like Michael Collins and Graham Hancock, and there was nothing new that I could add to that element right now. I wanted to give it, I came at it from a different approach, which is what we just talked about. They may be right. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying it's a theory, but I think the simplest explanation is usually true. And going back with the regeneration theory that we're proposing, I think that lines up exactly with what the vulture represents in the iconography. Now, going back to the porthole, what they call the porthole stone, I think that also, we don't address it in the book specifically, but I think that's tied to the regeneration theory because that porthole stone, I think, represents a womb. Just like Enclosure D represents a symbolic womb. That porthole stone may be a symbolic womb of how the soul travels back to the heavens during the regeneration process of becoming a star god deity. I don't know that for sure. I'm just thinking out loud, but it may be why it's pointed and oriented to the north. It could have been pointed or oriented towards a constellation. Now, I think those enclosures were roofed. I don't think they were open to the sky like we see them today. I think they were roofed. And so I don't know that it would have been open to the sky where you could have seen that. But it may have been orientated that way. I theorize that instead of Cygnus, I think they were probably revering the constellation Taurus, right near Orion. And that would make sense if they're worshiping the bull.
What about Adam and Eve? One of the interesting, other unique sort of suggestions that you guys entertain is there's a connection to Adam and Eve with this site. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the connection to Adam and Eve. This gets back into peeling back some of the layers in Mesopotamian history and in the Sumerian language. And here it is in a nutshell. When you're looking at at the iconography where the neck would be on both of those pillars, Eastern Pillar 18, Western Pillar 31. When you look at this when you're looking at this in a broader context, which is what I did when I'm studying Göbekli Tepe, I zoomed out and looked at the region. So I give this kind of 35,000 foot overview of the region to see what contextually, archaeologically is there. And in a neighboring mountain, it's a volcanic mountain called Mount Karaka. And in Sumerian, when you break this down in Sumerian, it kind of peels back the layers of the onion on what this means, because they had this whole thing that they did, this whole life that they lived centered around their belief in the afterlife. So even I think the changes of the season from spring when you plant, or now this is before agriculture, but during the spring when things are coming up to the harvest of the in the autumn to the dying of the winter, they projected all this and even the cosmos as this whole kind of life and death and regeneration cycle. And so they projected that cosmology into everything that they did and that they believed in. And going back to the identification of the two pillars, I theorize that on Western Pillar 31, because this is the deification of Adam through the image of the bull, and we see that in Sumerian, the name An, which is one of the one of the top deities in the Sumerian pantheon. There were 7 top deities early on. An was at the top of this, and his name was the A in Sumerian means a father or ancestor or progenitor of to like in the original father ancestor. The N in Sumerian would be to lift up or to raise up on high. And so the literal translation of the Sumerian god An would be to lift up on high or to put in the highest. And so this is where we see the transliteration of that meaning with the imagery of the bull ties in to Western Pillar 31, which is a deification of Adam. And then when you get over to Eastern Pillar 18, you see that crescent moon. That crescent moon also plays a role in this because the imagery of Eve is displayed in this as well. And so the deification of both Adam and Eve plays a role into the original, they considered them original father ancestors. And this goes back into this whole symbology of life and death and rebirth in the afterlife. But the only way you could be reborn and regenerated is through the mother goddess of Eve, who they had deified through the symbolic womb of the burial. And this is why they bring in those skulls, because they suspended those skulls in the enclosures, and they performed some kind of ritual or libation ceremony in enclosure D. And then through the father god of Adam, they believe that this is how you get reborn back into the afterlife. So the whole thing with Adam and Eve, we detail it in the book and how we make these connections. But look, they have deified both Adam and Eve as their father ancestors, and this is why you have those two central anthropomorphic pillars that are 18.5 foot tall that are wearing foxpelt loincloths. Now, why would you portray a stone image wearing foxpelt loincloths to cover their nakedness? This only goes back to the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis. And then you have the imagery of the arms wrapping around to the navel with the hands, and they're wearing a belt that's holding that foxpelt loincloth up. Those arms signal divinity. And you see in the Ugaritic text that arms is always in reference to Baal or to Baal worship. And so we see that the arms and the standing up straight of these pillars represent divinity. And so we see that I think that they have deified their original ancestors, Adam and Eve.
And this regeneration cycle is something that, to bring it back to Christian theology, if you should read 1 Corinthians 15, that chapter, Paul makes it very clear to the church at Corinth that this is at the heart of the gospel. If you don't believe that Jesus was literally raised from the dead, first of all, he appeared to 500 people who are mostly still alive. So send somebody to Jerusalem and ask around to confirm. Don't believe me, send somebody to Jerusalem and ask around, because you must believe this. Otherwise, you don't really get the heart of the gospel message. It's all about resurrection. If you say, apparently he was confronting some Sadducean theology of the church at Corinth. How can some of you say that Christ is not raised from the dead? Because if he's not raised, you're still in our sin. Our preaching is in vain. We have all been our most miserable. It's all about resurrection. We see this through the religions of the ancient Near East, the veneration of the ancestors, which we talked about on our previous Iron and Myth program. The veneration of the dead around the ancient Near East was central to the religion of the Amorites, who surrounded the Israelites. I mean, Joshua at Mount Ebal saying, "Choose this day whom you will serve, the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve Yahweh." This is what it's all about. And I think deciphering the cult of the dead and the veneration of ancestors, going all the way back to Adam and Eve at Göbekli Tepe, is remarkable. And I know we could do another hour on this easy because there's so much that has gone unsaid. I will put a link to our previous discussion about this program in the notes below, because in that program we talked about Aaron's deciphering of that H-shaped symbol and how it connects to the Luvian language, which was southern Anatolia, but didn't arrive in Anatolia until about 2200 BC. So about 6,000 years after the end of Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah.
So there's still a lot left unsaid. But before we close, Let me give Judd and Aaron one last shot here. Judd, what do you hope people take away from decoding Göbekli Tepe?
Well, one of the things that I hope that they take away is that there are large chunks of our history that are not being disseminated on a popular level, and I'm speaking as someone who's taught history and anthropology and archaeology, in multiple venues, college, university, my own institute. If one of the disturbing trends you notice about textbooks is that this chapter in human history is pitifully dealt with. In other words, our textbooks that we're churning out are still talking about ancient Sumeria, ancient Egypt, the Harappan civilization as the earliest civilization on the planet. Occasionally you'll get a word or a paragraph about a site like Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe or Novaluchari or Çatalhöyük. But generally prehistory is treated as this sort of speed bump to getting on to the quote unquote more exciting rock and roll stuff. That just can't stand anymore. There's certainly an attempt to obfuscate as much about this chapter in human history. As much as we know about Göbekli Tepe now, it's still not publicly disseminated for all of its importance. And so I hope that people will take a closer look at this part of the world and its history, but also for students of the Bible to look at how important prehistoric and ancient Anatolia is to the biblical narrative. In a lot of ways, the narrative begins and ends in Anatolia. Whatever name we give to it, whether it's Turkey today or Anatolia or Asia Minor, it's crucial to the biblical story, and that's one of the general goals that we had in writing the book, aside from the specific goals of looking at the biblical implications of a site like Göbekli Tepe.
And I would argue that this just makes your contention that Babel was in Shinar in southern Turkey and not in southeastern Iraq even more interesting. Aaron, what do you hope readers take away from decoding Göbekli Tepe?
Look, if you have an interest in biblical history, the Old Testament, Göbekli Tepe, you may have heard of it, may not have heard of it. But if you have an interest in history, in the biblical history specifically, we make the connection of Göbekli Tepe to biblical history. And it's not something that we just theorized and put together to fit our paradigm. We took a look at it from a different perspective through the biblical lens, but we wanted to bring forth some new evidence about the site looking through the biblical lens, because this is the first book that's ever done that regarding Göbekli Tepe. So, we look at, we try to answer who the people were, why they were there, and what they were doing specifically. But, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. And I think just recently I read a research paper on academia that linked a neighboring site to Göbekli Tepe with Baal worship. And I'll send that article to you if you're interested in reading it. But there's new things that are coming out. And just like Brian said earlier in the program, the site of Göbekli Tepe has barely been touched. If you equate that to Egypt, Egypt is only 1% excavated. 99% of Egypt still under the sand. So think about what we're going to learn at Göbekli Tepe when the rest of this gets excavated. I know there's been reports that they've stopped excavations there. They haven't. They've slowed down a little bit. They haven't stopped excavations. But it's going to be a long time before, we know more information. That's unfortunate, but that's the nature of archaeology. And I think the German Institute of Archaeology is doing a great job over there. And it just takes time to publish and get these things out. But I think if you want to know about the biblical history of Göbekli Tepe, this is the book for you. Rewrote this book for people that have just a general interest or a particular interest in the biblical history, but for people who really are kind of keened in to Göbekli Tepe, this, I think, will provide you some answers that we're proposing in these new theories about Göbekli Tepe.
And it's about time that somebody takes a biblical look at it, because guys like Graham Hancock and Andrew Collins, we respect their work, but they're not applying a biblical filter to the information, and that is long overdue. Aaron Judkins, Dr. Aaron Judkins, Dr. Judd Burton, the authors of the book Decoding Göbekli Tepe, Biblical Anatolia and the Watchers. Aaron, thanks for joining our Iron and Myth crew this month. Brian Godawa, Pastor Doug Van Dorn. Please check the show notes below, whether you're watching or listening, for links to all of our websites and a link to the book Decoding Göbekli Tepe. Guys, fascinating conversation. It went much too quickly. Check the notes below this program, whether you're watching or listening. You'll get links to the websites for all of our guests this week, as well as to where you can find the book Decoding Göbekli Tepe, a long-awaited and much-needed interpretation of that ancient site from a Christian perspective. And again, it was my great honor to write the foreword for Judd and Aaron for that book. Coming up, many of you have asked about how we are doing after the storms that came through Missouri overnight last night. As we're recording this on Saturday, March 15th, they came through Friday night into Saturday morning. We're fine. I'll talk a little bit about that. Quick health update, and I will tell you why Doge is not going nearly far enough. Despite all of the protests and the Teslas burning, it is not nearly enough. More on A View from the Bunker straight ahead.
The 10 plagues of Moses and the Exodus were judgment upon the gods of Egypt, because those gods were demonic reality. Chronicles of the Watchers is a series of biblical novels by best-selling author Brian Godawa, charting the influence of spiritual warfare on human history. The War of Gods and Men. A must-read. Moses Against the Gods of Egypt and Other Supernatural Historical Novels in the series Chronicles of the Watchers. Available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook at Amazon.com. That's Chronicles of the Watchers by Brian Godawa at Amazon.com.
We'd love to meet you. Here are a few of the places you can find Sharon and Derek Gilbert in the months ahead. The Aliens, AI, and the Antichrist Conference in Blue Eye, Missouri, April 10th through 12th. Mysteries of the Bibleverse Conference, June 13th and 14th in Indianapolis. The Go Therefore Conference, July 25th and 26th in Brookville, Ohio. The Remnant Rising Conference, August 22nd through 24th in Springfield, Missouri. For the latest information, go to gilberthouse.org/calendar. Talking the Walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net. Among many other places, you'll find us also our main web hub, gilberthouse.org, my website, derekpgilbert.com. You'll find us on, we are on Telegram now. The t.me/viewfromthebunker. Find us there. You'll also find us on Substack, gilberthouse.substack.com. Social media, X at viewfrombunker, at Derek Gilbert. Derek Gilbert at Gilberthouse_TV on Truth Social, and Gab Eric at Derek P. Gilbert. As I get older, the enunciation begins to slip just a little bit. Also on YouTube at Gilbert House. Please subscribe, share, click the bell for notifications, hit that like button, and then please download our free mobile app, which brings all of our content right into your smartphone or tablet, whether it's iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle Fire. We've also got versions for your big screen. Please look for the Gilbert House channel for Roku, Apple TV, or Amazon Fire TV. If you've got a smart TV preloaded with those or one of those, then please add us to your TV, and all of this video content will come directly to you. But the mobile app has some additional features that are really, really neat. It's got a Bible with multiple translations. In fact, an audio Bible with multiple translations, calendar our upcoming events, and a community section where you can join others in commiserating, asking for prayer, offering prayer, advice, asking questions of Sharon and me, which we address each week on our Gilbert House Fellowship Bible Study. That and more. We got links at our website. All of these, the apps are free, mobile or for your smart TV. They are free, gilberthouse.org/app. Let's talk about DOGE, first of all. The Department of Government Efficiency. Elon Musk tasked by President Trump for bringing some sanity to government spending, and you've seen some of the things that they have cut from the budget. And thanks to some of the things that the team at DOGE has discovered, USAID, has been rolled into the State Department, which is where it should have been all along, instead of operating as an independent agency, as a sort of progressive slush fund to finance, frankly, anti-American policies around the world. That has been rolled into the State Department, and 83% of the programs have been canceled. Secretary of State Marco Rubio now overseeing what's left. Because there are some good programs as part of USAID. We've heard from some friends who have ministries that work in Africa, and some of the relief that they were bringing to people in need there was coming from USAID. But at the same time, you were getting things like transgender comic books being published in Peru and stuff like that. That was just absolutely nuts. Well, the authority given by it's wrestling time here in the studio. The authority given to Elon Musk and his team by President Trump has just driven liberals absolutely crazy. Some Republicans as well. And as one Republican congressman said, the reason he's getting some bipartisan pushback is because there are people on both sides of the aisle who've benefited from the lack of oversight enjoyed by the federal government for decades. And progressives and then latched on to Elon Musk as sort of a target of their rage, whereas 10 years ago, Tesla was the darling of progressives, liberals. It was a status symbol to own an electric vehicle produced by Tesla. The Cybertruck became a status symbol as well because they're really, really expensive. So you got to have some coin if you're going to buy one of those things. But now that he's taking an axe, a samurai sword, to the federal budget and cutting out things that are wasteful, and maybe going a little too far in a couple of places, but for the most part, cutting out just ridiculous amounts of spending with no oversight. According to Doge, literally hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars being sent out by the United States Treasury with no categorization. So nobody knows exactly where that money was going and for what. We've heard about the $800 hammers and the gold-plated toilet seats at the Department of Defense. That's like the tip of the iceberg, apparently, based on what Doge has been finding. But again, progressives are using this as justification to vandalize Teslas. I don't know how widespread this is. I've heard from a podcaster out in California that we live in, who lives in Silicon Valley, that there's not really much of that going on there, and that's as liberal a place as you'll find in America. On the other hand, you're seeing news reports of Tesla dealerships being vandalized and burned, and so again, it's just crazy. It's like watching professional wrestling, where the heel turns into a babyface from one week to the next. Elon Musk, who was a darling of progressives just a few years ago, because he realized that the Democratic Party had gone insane, is now the target through Teslas and his Tesla dealerships as a villain. Okay, you're seeing the camera. I'm getting bumped around here because Grace has decided she needs to go hide underneath the desk from Glory. All right. But here's the thing. What Musk has found, what his team at Doge has found, is not nearly enough. It is not even a fraction of enough to put a dent in government spending. In the month of February, it was revealed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, by the government. Grace, could you not bump the camera, please? Thank you. that the government spent more than $600 billion. That's an increase of 6% over last February. The government only took in $297 billion in tax revenue in February, which means, not to put too fine a point on it, but the government spent more than twice as much money as it took in during the month of February. So, and at the rate Doge is going in finding $1 billion here, $1 billion there, it would take several hundred years of that kind of cutting for Doge to actually bring the federal budget in line with revenue. So again, think about that. At the rate Doge is going and the fact that it can't touch entitlement programs like Social Security, except maybe, stopping payments to guys who were born in the 1650s. Not many of those, but, people are 120, 130 years old. Somebody's cashing those checks, and it's certainly not the people whose names are on them. But at the rate they're going, cutting those things, which need to be cut, no question, but at the rate they're going, it would take until the 24th century for the federal budget of the United States of America to fall in line with revenues. Yeah, I agree, Glory. That's ridiculous. So for all of the anger and the rage that is being ginned up by activists, angry at what President Trump and Elon Musk are trying to do, it's not going to have any real effect. Except, and maybe this is why Democrats, progressives, people on the streets are angry and protesting and torching Tesla dealerships, is because by highlighting these ridiculous things on which our tax dollars are being spent, even though the cuts themselves won't solve the problem, it is making it very, very clear to us American taxpayers that our federal government has been out of control for a long time. And that it's time now to let's forget the razor blade. Let's forget the samurai sword for making cuts. Let's take a wrecking ball to it. We definitely need to make some cuts, and probably some painful cuts before the cuts are made for us, because at the rate things are going with the United States federal budget, the money that we've been sending all over the world for programs that we, the American taxpayers, would oppose, and money being spent here on ridiculous things like teaching transgender boys, these are girls who identify as boys, how not to get pregnant. It's pretty much the regular way, Anyway, until we start making cuts to entitlement programs like Medicare, and I say this as somebody who is eagerly looking forward to my next, couple years when I can get onto Medicare, but unless we start cutting things like Medicare, Social Security, and yes, even defense spending, we are going to run into the brick wall of default. The United States going bankrupt on its debt. And that's going to have a global impact, because a lot of the people who own the treasury bonds, which are the IOUs that the United States government sells to finance this deficit spending, that's going to have global consequences. So for all of the protests against Doge, it's really inconsequential, except that it is perhaps getting the public's attitude about government spending to change, and the realization that, we're all going to have to swallow a bitter pill here unless we want to run the country off the cliff. And so all of the Democrats and the protesters who are angry at Elon Musk, look in the mirror, because it's your attitude towards spending that's put us in this situation. Bless your pointy little heads. Thank you to all of you who asked us, who are where we live in Southwest Missouri in the Ozarks, asked us about our safety after the tornadoes that came through Missouri Friday night. Again, we're fine. It looks as though the worst of the storms really fired up just to the north and the east of where we are. We're southwest of Springfield, Missouri, about 45 minutes. And while there was one tornado warning for Greene County, which is where Springfield is located, the worst of it was east of here and north of here, up towards the St. Louis area. There were 11 people who died here in Missouri because of those tornadoes Friday night into Saturday morning. 3 in Ozark County, that was south central Missouri, south of the town of West Plains. 1 in Butler County, 6 in Wayne County, and 1 in Jefferson County, which is just south of St. Louis. Our daughter in the St. Louis area, she lives in the city itself, said that there was one point where she went into the basement, which took her a lot of courage because she says there's like a cajillion spiders down there. A cajillion spiders down there. So it was, there was a tornado warning from that one that was on the ground in Arnold, and it was headed up towards South County, St. Louis, and St. Louis City. So she wisely took precautions. But these storms continue to cross Illinois. And this storm, which when you look at it on the radar that covers the entire country, it looks like a giant inland hurricane. It is spinning like a giant hurricane, and the tail end of it on Saturday afternoon and evening was crossing the Mid-South. So people in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, in for some very heavy weather on Saturday. Don't know what's going on there as of this recording, but you will know more by the time this program is out there. So anyway, we are fine. Folks to the east and northeast of us got it a lot worse than we did. We had some hail here, lemon drop sized hail, which is fairly large for here, but and some high winds and heavy rain, but it only lasted about an hour. It's a very thin line of storms that came through here. Much, much worse to the north and northeast of us. Health update. I went for some neurological testing on Friday morning. This was a test called an EMG, electromyograph, and a nerve conduction test. We're trying to figure out what is going on with my gait and my balance issues. If you've been following us for any length of time, you notice that this is now my constant companion. I need it for balance. I've got a condition called foot drop or drop foot, which means basically I can't raise the fronts of my feet, which is kind of important when you're walking because you normally hit with your heels and then you rock forward and then push off with your toes. Can't do any of that. When I walk, it's like I'm walking in scuba flippers. It's like, flap, 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 which is more difficult. I just have to remember to raise my knees so I don't drag my toes and literally trip over my own feet. It is, cause is unknown at this point. Normally when it affects people, it's a result of some sort of injury, either to nerve coming from the spine or the perineal nerve, which runs along the outside of your leg from your knee downward. And this is affecting both sides equally. And I don't have back issues, thankfully. I have not had any surgery that would have affected that nerve or those nerves. And again, the aneurysm that I had corrected last fall was on the one side, and it should not have affected either. So it's not a vascular issue. It's not, as far as we know, not a nerve compression issue. Might be something in my lower back, I suppose, but you'd think that I would have other symptoms. So the EMG nerve conduction, sir, I don't know what the results are yet, other than what they told me at the time, which was, boy, if you were getting normal nerve responses in your lower legs, every time I jolted you like this, you'd be kicking me. And I was barely feeling anything. So there's something that is interfering with the nerve signals pretty much below my knees. And so we will see what happens. Still able to get around. It just takes me longer. And like I said, I have to use the cane to keep my balance, because you don't realize until you're not able to, adjust with your feet up and down, how much you depend on that to maintain balance. When your center of gravity shifts a little bit, you can normally just adjust a little bit without even thinking. You don't even have to think about it. The only way I can do that now is by shuffling my feet, because I don't have the muscle control in my feet anymore. They're just sort of hanging off my ankles. And so, it's made things a little more interesting. But I got to say, there are some advantages, because I got now one of those little handicap tags I can hang on my mirror, so I get great parking everywhere. And I was able to, when I flew to Canada for the men's conference up there, the men's discipleship weekend, I got pushed through the airports in a wheelchair. So that's, it's not all bad. So anyway, your prayers are much appreciated, but that's, we're still waiting on some answers and doing some other common sense things, some supplements to build immunity, immune system and other things. So we'll just keep pushing forward. I mean, it does make you appreciate things that you used to take for granted. because a lot of these things that I took for granted are things that some people cannot do for themselves anymore. So there are lessons to be learned in this, and maybe that's one of them. Anyway, coming up, we've got some conferences to tell you about. We will be at the Aliens, AI, and the Antichrist conference in April, just over a month, little less than a month from now, April 10th through 12th. This is at Blue Eye, Missouri, here in the Ozarks, southwest of Branson, about 30 minutes, south of us, about 45 minutes. So if you're in northern Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, southern Missouri, please consider joining us because this conference is free to attend. We'll be there with Carl Gallups, Joe Artis Horn, Bishop Alan DiDio, Dave Robbins of End Times Ministries, Vicki Joy Anderson, L.A. Marzulli will be Skyping in as well. Sharon and I will both be speaking, and this is right up our alley. Aliens, AI, our new book, The Gates of Hell, opens with a fictional AI scenario, and we've got several chapters in there dedicated to the role of artificial intelligence in the end times. And you want to check out yesterday's PID Radio if you haven't already, because we spent the second half talking about a new essay by a tech CEO who argues that the singularity is already here, that it happened in February. And a report that we can't confirm, he couldn't confirm either, but at least one person claiming that 3 separate artificial intelligence systems all achieved self-awareness at the same time and are now converging with one another. And I said it turns out that while researchers thought they were studying the AIs were actually studying us. So there's that, and the book that I co-authored with Donna Howell and Allie Anderson, Destination Earth, gets into the aliens question. So aliens, AI, the Antichrist, right up our alley. We hope you join us. If you can't be there, you do need to register, though. Even though it's free, you need to register because fire code regulations, they can only put so many people in the building. So there's that. And also, what was the other thing I was going to... Oh, yes, streaming video, just $25. So you can find out more at readynowexpo.com, readynowexpo.com. In June, we'll be in the Indianapolis area, Carmel, Indiana, at the Drury Plaza Hotel for the Mysteries of the Bibleverse Conference. L.A. Marzulli, Pastor Mike Hoggard, Mac Dominic, Micah Van Huff, Sharon and I both speaking twice. I will be the keynote speaker one of those days, which is great because no time limit, because there's no speaker after me. That'll be great. Find out more at marginalmysteries.com. And please sign up, join us there for that, marginalmysteries.com. At the end of July, July 25th and 26th, the Go Therefore Conference in Dayton, suburban Brookville, Ohio. That's the Harvest Revival Center. Dr. Michael Lake, David Heavener, Joe Artis Horn, Vicki Joy Anderson, Pastor Casper McLeod, Tom Dunn, our good friend Kenny C. will be there as well. And streaming video will be available for this conference. You can find out more and register to either join us in person. Wonderful facility there, great church. Pastor Neil Peterson's team just makes it a real delight. Great AV system. So going to take advantage of the big screen behind me for some really awesome slides. Join us there. GoThereforeConference.com, GoThereforeConference.com. And then in August 22nd through 24th, the Remnant Rising Conference at the Oasis Hotel and Convention Center in Springfield, Missouri, right here in the Ozarks. Pastor Paul Begley, Joe Artis Horn, Donna Howell, Nita Horn, Vicki Joy Anderson, Tracy Tennant, Jamie Walden, and more. And we hope you join us there for that. The streaming video again on that one as well. Find out more and register at hearthewatchmen.com. That's hearthewatchmen.com. And yes, we are planning to go to Israel in October, and we've got a special announcement. Should have announced this before the break as a tease. Carl Tykrib is joining us as our special guest on our October tour of Israel, October 19th through 30th. Sharon and me, Carl Tykrib, his lovely wife Leanne, they will be joining us. Hope you join us for the tour and the optional 3-day extension to Jordan. Find out more and reserve your place online at gilberthouse.org/travel. That's gilberthouse.org/travel. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen, as the case may be. If you're watching again, please subscribe, share, click the bell for notifications, hit that like button. Or if you're listening, subscribe at Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer, the inimitable D.C. Good. A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, and good night, Oliver, wherever you are. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is A View from the Bunker.